So we should just talk a little bit about the Sigma Awards. Okay, which basically Aron and I and it's on. Aron and I and Marianne and King, who's not here, basically created. We were all we were all judges and part of the Data Journalism Awards, which were part of the Global Editors Network, which regrettably all imploded at some point. But Aron and I felt really strongly that data journalism really needed an award, really needed to not just recognize the great work, which is really important, but also encourage more similar ambitious work and build a community, which I'm really proud to say that we've managed to do with the Sigmas. It's not just an award, as you'll see from all of this and this wonderful 3D not exploded pie chart, which some of you will recognize the ironic humor in here, but some of you may not. Don't do this. That's all I can say. But that we've actually really built a really nice community of data journalists, and we really feel strongly about the importance of data journalism and its role in journalism in general, and so that's why we are here. So let's go.
The goal of this session is to go through the kind of trends that we saw this year, good and worrisome, and to also talk about the trends that we've seen over the years that are quite interesting or noteworthy. So when people do apply to the competition, they have to share with us more than a simple description of the work that they've done. So we ask about the technologies used, the impact reached, the challenges they've encountered, and also the lessons that they've learned. So we sort of picked from there too. We believe that this can be super valuable to other members, and so we've shared that along on GitHub for the past couple of years. Looking at this data, we can better understand what technologies are used throughout the years and witness the evolution of our field. And so we've gathered some recent trends. First let's say, we've revealed the list of the winners of this year's competition earlier this afternoon. So we thought we might just give a big shout out to the winners, the 2022 winners. There are nine projects that have been rewarded this year, and also 3 portfolios that just bring light to the outstanding work done by incredible teams in 3 different countries. So we invite you to go and check out either the website or our Twitter account, where we've just published a thread with all of them. So that's that. So about the trends that we sort of witnessed over the past few years, I mean, I think those are pretty much the biggest buzzword we hear in the newsrooms these days, right? But we gathered them right here. We've seen a lot of projects using technologies related to drones and sensors and satellite images. Incredible advanced projects using artificial intelligence and machine learning too, which we will come to. Yeah, I know, that's the French intelligence artificielle. That's the French acronym. And machine learning, which we will come to during this session. The obvious use of JavaScript for graphics. A lot of people in lots of countries still have to do a lot of scraping to get data, and that's something we see each year. Because of the pandemic and other sort of breaking news kind of events, journalists have had to also harness a lot of real-time data and sort of work on the go with numbers that just keep on changing, and that's something that we do witness as well I mean, that's verified in the data that we've got. In terms of trend in the format side of things, we also see more and more teams trying to get to things like news games and immersive journalism, to interact more and more with the audience and to sort of try and put people in the shoes of witnesses of people living the action, as we can say. Scrollytelling, that funny word that we're also going to mention later, that is just, I mean, it hasn't stopped being used since, 2012, and that's no fault thing. And finally, the last point was, sorry, the use of data skills for fact-checking projects. So we see a lot of teams that were, until now, focused on doing verification and fact-checking in the newsrooms, sort of harnessing more data-driven skills. And to me, it's a pleasure to see those two communities sort of merging more and more over the past few months or even the past year or so, which I hope is kind of promising for us all. I talk a lot, I'm sorry. The first project that we wanted to showcase comes from South Korea, and it involves some AR technology, which I hope is going to work out if I bring it up here. Yay. And so, yeah, scroll. Because we're on the desktop, that's how it works out too, but it's a very also mobile-friendly projects from over there. And I can't scroll and do two things at the same time. I wish I could have a robot do that for me too. But, basically, it comes from an organization called Ankukilbo in South Korea. And it's, for those of you who can't read Korean, the title is The Watchers Overhead. And it talks about the Korean peninsula and the sort of silent satellite war that's going on over it. Because for the past 70 years, there's been a conflict in this area between the zone separating the two Koreas. And so lots of satellites from big world powers such as the United States, Russia, China, Japan have been orbiting the airspace above the peninsula. And the news team behind this project analyzed some 40,000 pieces of space surveillance data to map and simulate the 3D satellites that cannot be seen by the naked eye. This is the kind of, what did we call it? Cool or sexy? Data-driven projects that we've witnessed over the past few years. Should I? Well, maybe one word about what it can really teach us, because we're here to talk about lessons. The reason why we brought up this example is that it sort of demonstrates that data journalism can present not only some statistical analysis, but also take some raw data into a very visually and technologically appealing way. And it shows journalists that there's a way to provide readers with new storytelling experience, both on desktop and mobile, using augmented reality and whatnot. Whatnot? I did say that.
This is me. All right. Oh, God, this is bad. I'm just going to lean. So another trend that we're seeing a lot more of, and I have to say, like, speaking very selfishly and happily speaking very selflessly, is sharing. We are seeing more and more news organizations, journalists sharing ideas, sharing knowledge, and sharing content. That is something that we, like back in the early 1800s when I was working as a data journalist, that never happened. When you got a data set and when you were working on a big project, it was the opposite of sharing. You wanted to keep everything for yourself. Even when the project launched, even when that data was no longer really valuable to you, you almost never would see a news organization sharing it. I think it was like some of the organizations that were early on in this space, ProPublica for sure, Nacion, who we'll get to a little bit later in Argentina, very much led the way in this respect. But now this is like becoming very commonplace. And so we're going to highlight a lot of projects today, and this is not because these projects even necessarily were award winners, like this project here, which was from 2021. It was a shortlisted project from the University of Maryland, the Howard Center. Oh, can you leave the slides up? It really is, nobody needs to see us. You see us here, you see us there truly. Yeah, just leave the slides up, it'd be great. It's called Nowhere to Go. And they worked across, it was a collaboration of many different universities actually doing a project on homelessness. And it involved acquiring a lot of data and public documents and at the local level. And they built this kind of collaborative data set that they published through Big Local News, which is another project we're going to talk about in a little bit. And by virtue of this sort of collaborative, sort of shared approach, they were able to tell a story about how essentially homelessness is being criminalized at the local level, that you couldn't tell really any other way. You couldn't tell that this is something that actually is a trend across the entire country. So the power of working together and sharing assets, sharing knowledge, and sharing data is why this is what made this project stand out. Let me flip to the next. A couple years ago, the Associated Press, this actually was a winner from 2020. Associated Press, we're seeing a lot of sharing of not just data, sort of the raw materials. We're actually seeing a lot more tools that are being created and shared widely. So the Associated Press created with a project they call Datakit. And what Datakit is, when you're working on a shared, how many people here are data journalists in the room? Okay. So those of you who raise your hand and work on teams of more than 3 or 4 will probably, actually, those of you who raise your hands and are working on teams of more than 1 probably have experienced this problem, where you create a project and you launch your project, and then you have to go back and update your project, and then you go and you're scratching your head and you're like, wait a minute, where did I put that? And where did this go? And where's this other code? And where does that spreadsheet come from? And is there documentation here? I didn't write any documentation, did I? It is a real problem when you're trying to work collaboratively in an organization and there's not a predictable structure to how you do projects. And this is like, I gotta say, like when they submitted this and we started talking about this as a jury, this is probably, this is plumbing, people. This is like one of the least sexy projects that we probably have ever seen, because it's literally, it creates a sort of a folder structure for you. And it automatically creates a GitHub repo. It does some stuff that you do in a repetitive way, but it does it in a way that allows a team to work together. Everybody knows where everything belongs because it's all labeled. Everybody's project is consistent. Another journalist can come in and look at someone else's work and have a pretty good idea of where to find stuff. And we ended up giving it a Sigma Award. It was a really amazing project. And most importantly, they made it available for anyone to use. So you can go and use that yourself. The BBC takes a different approach. This is one of my favorite initiatives around this idea of sharing and collaboration. So the BBC launched their local news shared data unit. When was it? Oh, I'm sorry. I was trying to remember when they launched it. Anyway, it's a few years back, we'll say. And the way it works is that other journalists who maybe they have some data skills, or maybe they want to learn data skills, can apply to be part of their shared data unit. They come and work side by side in the BBC. They work with BBC reporters on BBC projects in the hopes of getting those projects, and occasionally this has happened, getting their projects actually on air. And in the process, they gain a ton of skills. They learn kind of like how they really raise their skill levels. And And it's kind of a way for the BBC to open its doors a bit and help the industry, help journalists who are working in smaller organizations in particular, because most of the journalists that come in, actually I think all of the journalists who come into the shared data unit from outside are local journalists. It's a way for them to get experience that would be it would be really difficult any other way. And it's a program that's had a lot of success and a lot of impact over the years. And this one is the one that actually blew my mind the most. I used to work there, not at GitHub, at the New York Times. And I can tell you, the New York Times, of all of those journalists who did not want to share, who would collect their toys in a corner and say, mine, not yours, that was the default setting for the New York Times for years. And when the New York Times started collecting COVID data, and they started sharing it in this way, it blew my mind. And not only did they share their data that, by the way, they, and in many cases only they, using their incredible resources, were able to collect. Many other news organizations actually started using the New York Times data as their sort of default data set, telling the story that local government should have been allowing us to tell. It's sort of embarrassing that a news organization has to do the work of government, but sometimes that's the way it is. This was an exceptional project, and but it did not win a Cigna award. It was a shortlisted project. That, I think, will tell you everything you need to know about how competitive this competition has become, that the New York Times has had many entries that were not even shortlisted, actually. In many cases, really, really, really strong competition. And this is a fantastic example.
Can I just riff on that for a second? I mean, two riffs on that for a second. One is that the awards truly are global, and we could probably spend a bit of time talking about that. And if you looked at the list of winners, you'll see they come from all around the world. And oftentimes, when you think about data journalism, you think about data viz, you think about like the really big shops and the resources that they have. And rightfully they do some fantastic work. But I think one of the things that we've done at the Sigmas is really look across the world and find all of the great data journalism that's going on. To the point, as Aron notes, the Times doesn't win that consistently, and that we've got newsrooms, and we will talk about some of them, very, very small newsrooms that frankly do really good work, and especially in the face of huge obstacles and risks. The one other quick riff just on this that I wanted to just throw in, you can tell we did not rehearse this particularly well, is that, you can get...
Now they can.
Well, now they can, that's true. Is that, you might think from a lot of the sharing examples that we have, and this is an example that was not a Sigma awardee, and but that, it tends to go from big newsrooms to small newsrooms. Like the big newsrooms are the ones that get things together. But there are also examples where small newsrooms aggregate upwards. Bureau Local did a really good series at one point about homelessness in the UK way back. That was an idea that came out of their local newsrooms. It wasn't somebody sitting in central London saying, let's do this and let's ask them what your help is. It was ideas coming in, and then the data was collected locally, and because it was collected locally and then aggregated nationally, they could then get the power of all of that together. So just want to sort of point out that this moves in multiple different directions, and that we're all better when we work together.
Yeah, and that's I guess on the lesson side, that's the lesson here, is that this isn't a zero-sum game. That there are many, many examples that we can point to of news organizations where the aggregate effort ends up being where everybody wins, where you can get your story, I can get my story, but in the act of sharing, in the act of working together and collaborating, everybody does better.
This is me. Yeah. We did practice this part. So this and the next slide, if we just move back and forth for a second. So I just really, about stories that, we think of news as things that just happened, and in fact, these, please don't do that. And these are stories that are not just old, in the sense they're old as in they're 70 years old, and in one case 150 years old. But they're about inequities and about issues that have been around forever, and they're stories that are just in plain sight, that we don't see because they are the water that we live in. And so, this is where journalists sort of sit and don't say what happened, but why is something the way it is. And the two examples we have, one, a Dutch organization to look at the properties that were taken during World War II, and then distributed to other people, and to think about that long arc of inequity and and just theft, and then to be able to sort of break that down into sort of individual land lots, individual apartments, and to tell those stories and to try to understand where the restitution for all that might be. The other project looked at land that was basically taken from Native Americans, what were called land-grant universities, where they handed out land for public universities, which have done fantastic work in terms of educating Americans and, sort of a huge, important part of the American story, but built on a fundamental, I guess, crime and inequality and inequity of actually just taking land that belonged to other people, that belonged to Native Americans. And this work that had to go back over 150 or more years of sort of figuring out where those lands had come from, where they had been taken, who they'd been given to, and then breaking down right down to the parcels. This is an astounding amount of work. When you read this, there was no question this was just both immensely ambitious work that had great scope and told the world a really important thing about the history. Now, and I think the story was complex enough to sort of say this is not a story about just absolutely bad guys and absolutely good guys. I mean, there were absolutely bad guys, took the land, but that it happened so long ago. So what can you do with this now? And so it was incredibly complex and deep, but it's a story that needs to be told. So I think these are sort of really good examples of the kind of work you can do when, one, you sit and you look with your eyes open and say, why is the world this way instead of what happened? And then when you put in the effort to think about, stories are stories, no matter how long ago they happened, they are still worth telling. Oh, sorry, one more example. Forgot, we did not rehearse this. The Times did this great story this year, which was a winner this year, which is to look at the famous Tulsa, well, this is the problem, it's not a famous massacre. You know about it if you've been keeping up on the news or if you've been watching Watchmen, because that referred to it in the opening episode. But otherwise, it was this huge race. I guess you'd call it a race riot, except it wasn't. It was in fact a massacre, and called to light something that was important, that had happened, that again not enough people knew about. And then they did this amazing work on top of that. I mean, just telling that story and telling it to more people would have been already valuable. But what they did was they went down and they pulled up old land records. They looked at the histories of Tulsa. They mapped it out and they built this fantastic 3D walkthrough of it so that it would bring the story to life. Sometimes the facts alone will not make the story as visceral as it can be. What you could do with this is go down and see where people lived and understand what lives were destroyed. And that was the real power of this, ultimately, as a story.
So we're seeing a lot more use of statistics, and in particular of modeling, statistical modeling. This is not an example of that. This is a project from a Ukrainian organization named Texty, which does incredible work. They won a Sigma Award a couple years ago for a project which involved machine learning, where they trained an algorithm to recognize illegal copper mines. I think it was copper mines. And they did it by looking at publicly available satellite imagery. I think it was Google. It was either Google Maps or yeah. And so you're at that point you're training a computer to sift through thousands and thousands and thousands of images. Not mine, not mine, not mine. This is probably a mine. And a really clever application of technology to solve a problem that would be impossible for a human being to solve. And they do, as I said, incredible work. This project from 2020, which also was a winner, is they trained, again, a computer to recognize Russian disinformation campaigns and to flag them, to look for patterns of the different kinds of text and different kinds of messaging, and then track them systematically across different channels. This kind of work is, in our view, a really good application of some of these super advanced techniques. We're not going to talk about the project that did come up during the jury discussions, because we're not here to name and shame. But one of the cautions one of the downsides to applying these advanced techniques to traditional or to journalism is that you do have to understand what you're doing, and more importantly, the reader, viewer, and listener have to understand what you're doing, and they have to understand the limitations of what you're doing. The project in particular, again, no naming and shaming, built a statistical model to come to I'm trying to be very vague here, to come to a particular conclusion about something. And that something ended up being newsworthy. The problem is they reported that as fact and not as the result of a statistical model, which is not the same thing. You absolutely should be using these kinds of advanced techniques in journalism. We admire organizations that have the ability to do this. We have seen example after example after example where this is done right and done well. But there comes a point where we really have to be careful, because if you can't explain it to another person simply, and you're not totally transparent about what you're doing. When I teach my students data journalism, we talk about that, the nerd box, right? The part where you explain your methodology. If you can't explain that to a lay person, if a lay person reads that and can't understand what you did, then you gotta really stand back and say, am I actually doing the right thing here? Is what I'm doing, is this problematic in some way? And so we're just throwing this out as a sort of a caution. Because there is, in this industry, as I think a lot of us know, this sort of tendency, I sort of call it a binge purge cycle. We go through these stages where we get excited about something. At one point, we get excited about a particular technology or a particular story form or something. Right now, it's the scrolly story, right? Not the snowfall style scrolly story. It's the one that, as you scroll through, then a little chunk of text comes up, and then something graphical happens, and then another little chunk of text comes up, and then something graphical happens, and then everybody's index finger now you could lift 500 pounds because you're scrolling and scrolling endlessly, right? That's what we're all excited about right now, and that's fine. We do this as an industry. We get excited about something. But we have to be careful, particularly when we're applying these kinds of techniques where there is built-in uncertainty to be very clear that what we are reporting includes built-in uncertainty. And by the way, that includes polling. And that's all I'll say about that. All right. Another great Texty project, yeah. This one was a shortlist in this year. It was looking for, using the same sort of techniques to look for the frequency and location of wildfires around the country. Another great application of very, very advanced techniques, and a really, really good project. Anything you want to add there?
Just that.
Either one of you?
No, look, I mean, polling, how many people, well, actually, almost everybody here will know, I hope, right, what a margin of error is in a poll, right? Hands up, you know what a margin of error is? I mean, other than I've heard the word, you actually know what statistically it means? Okay, fewer hands. We all accept that, right? And we accept that because it's been drummed into us that we sort of know what it means and it's okay. And to some extent, I think that's fine because there is a general understanding, not entirely accurate, but there's a general understanding of what you understand by margin of error. The point is that as we move into more, and I use that word loosely because there are actually different types of error, different types of uncertainty in a lot of these things. And we often, when we start using new techniques, we don't make it always clear to our readers exactly what that uncertainty is. And it's really important to do that because stuff otherwise gets presented as fact. And this is what our model has shown us, as opposed to this model has shown us within this margin of error. And we write around it. We say at least these many people, or at least that much has happened. But I think it's really critical, if we're not to lose the trust of our readers, that we be transparent about not just what we know, but what we don't know and what we're not sure about.
And you know what? I'm gonna. One last thing. This is like some of the best advice I've ever been given. Tom Torak, who was a mentor of mine, longtime Philadelphia Inquirer, New York Times data reporter. He was the reason I was part of the team that he assembled at the Times back in the. He passed away very recently. Absolutely brilliant reporter. He gave me the best advice. He would say to me, when you're thinking about whether to do something, just imagine what the correction would be. Just imagine writing, how would you write the correction? And if you're thinking to yourself, because of an error in my statistical modeling, where my R squared wasn't X, Y, or Z, whatever, right? Just imagine how the correction's gonna read and work backwards, right? Great advice. I give that to you freely. All right, moving on.
Moving on. The next point that we wanted to point out is how many projects we've come across that reflects the hard work of journalists in places that are tough to work from, and on subjects that are sometimes that can seem bigger than us journalists. This project is a drone journalism project called Mapping Makoko. And it's a brilliant collaboration between several organizations, The Guardian, Code for Africa. They've used, they've done that in collaboration with the OpenStreetMap and the Police Center on Crisis Reporting. And the story behind this is that Makoko is actually one of Africa's most unique inner city slums. And it's estimated that there's about 300,000 people living there, but we're saying it's estimated because actually nobody has done the work of counting and mapping the place. And the area, and if you go onto your mapping tools, appear as a blank space, or used to. And so there was little information about the structure, the density, even the streets. And that means it was almost impossible for people to track land ownership or plan infrastructure. or even plan for emergencies or support development. And so this project helped the community fight for their land rights. And it combined data, satellite images, on-the-ground multimedia journalism, and some long-form storytelling from the journalism team. They've trained something like 15 plus people to map Makoko using drones and canoes, like the boats, and some open data platforms. And all together, they've managed to map the place. And the link that you have there is from The Guardian in Nigeria. I think they've used just under 1,000 images captured by drones for these projects. And so in the lessons that we can learn from this project is that in some countries, data journalism also helps put invisible communities into maps and into the foreground. And we haven't touched on this yet, but in places like West Africa or some Middle Eastern countries, even Southeast Asia, with all that's going on at the moment, data journalism can have that impact of working with civil society and other communities to sort of help out bring change, or actually bring the information to help out bring change in society. And the project that we mentioned earlier about the land ownership also comes to this too, because it's after this kind of journalism projects that some municipalities or even governments who were not necessarily suspecting the issues would sort of come to action and do stuff to solve the problem. So that's the bright side of things.
Also just to quickly add on this project, I think oftentimes we think of journalism as you have to uncover some wrongdoing, or you have to explain a really complex subject. And this is a case where essentially they just did a service, and it's incredibly valuable. And I'm not sure everybody would say this is journalism, but it is certainly, we serve communities, and this is real service to a community.
So we are one of the thrills of running a global award like this is when you're surprised by something, when something reveals itself that you never thought in a million years you would see. And this particular project is a great project, but I'm not here to talk about the project. I'm here to talk about the organization, which has won Sigma in the past. So Post Data Club is a data journalism organization based in Cuba. And when we first got an entry from them, we thought, really? That can't possibly be. But indeed, they do amazing work in circumstances that are, to say the least, extremely difficult. And it's not just Cuba. We have examples from many places of journalists who are putting themselves in danger, actually. And so if we flip to the next. Important Stories based in Russia, again, a relatively new organization. It's an investigative reporting organization, does incredible work. They also a winner this year. They are doing some of the most fearless reporting in a country where, obviously, being a fearless reporter can be, at times, very dangerous, that we've seen. And applying some incredibly complex data solutions to get to stories that would be otherwise impossible to get. They did a piece on informants, tracking informants, and informants across multiple jurisdictions. And it's not like the US, where you can go to Pacer and for a relatively small sum download a bunch of case files and throw them into a computer and have a story. I mean, it's a very, very difficult place to do this kind of work. And the depth of the reporting that they do under these circumstances it was just absolutely mind-blowing. And so in this case, this piece right here is about basically professional witnesses, who and they were able to track these people across multiple jurisdictions, as I said, and this is work that they could only do at this kind of scale using pretty advanced data techniques. Really incredible organization, and one that we were thrilled to see submitting for an award.
So this is a slightly different point, and it is something I think that we'll start to see more of. At least I hope we'll start to see more of that we don't see as much of as we should. I think COVID will change some of this as well. Which is basically that a lot of data projects tend to be one-off projects. You put in 6 months of work, 12 months of work, whatever it is, and then you do big important work, wins awards, and so on. Then you take it and you burn your notes and you move on and do something else. Building out data sets and building it sort of at industrial scale and then building it into newsroom workflows is a big step that I think we as an industry just need to do more of. We need to, first of all, stop wasting our efforts and keep doing what we're doing, especially if we think there's a data set that's valuable, and keep doing it. And then the other thing is to build it into our daily work. So it's not just the data team or the people that are working on a project that are using that data, but the entire newsroom. So big local news, we can bring it back up, is this, well, not you, it's them. Project at Stanford University is just this fantastic thing where they pulled together all this data and then made it available to people, and they can build on, you can build further local stories all the time off the data that they've aggregated and pull together. And this is the sort of thing that I think we're going to see more of, and that we should see more of, because I think it allows us to keep doing more work more quickly, more regularly, pulling on the value of data. If you look at the next slide, this is not a I don't believe it was actually submitted, but I just want to flag this up. This is something that's done at University of Southern California called Crosstown, which is, again, takes all of this data about the LA area, and not only do they collect the data and make it available, they built all of these analytics into it. So what they're doing is they're constantly analyzing this data automatically, which is really some of the power here, right? You don't want to be using a lot of human power. You don't have that many people to sort of sit and analyze data whenever you think there's a question you want to ask. You want the machine to keep asking those questions. And when they find something interesting, they take it and they flag it. And so what Crosstown does is it gets all this data. They turn out automated newsletters on all of the neighborhoods in LA. And what that does is it industrializes some of this data journalism. Does it always find sort of the deepest, most hard to get information? No. But does it add incrementally to the insights you have on a geography? It does. And that's the sort of thing that ultimately I think we're going to wind up moving into as an industry, where there's machines that will do some work for us automatically. They'll pair it with humans who can tell you when there's more value there and needs to be dug into. If there isn't, there's still value in those bits of information. And I think more and more we'll be seeing this, and hope and encourage people to think about that as they work on data projects.
So we're all gonna, as my Jewish mother would say, kvel a bit about La Nacion in Argentina. this is an organization that year after year after year after year demonstrates a commitment to outstanding work. They're really almost in a league of their own. It is hard to imagine an organization out there that has done more creative work in this space and shared in the way that they do. They routinely open source, for example. They do, in a country that does not have freedom of information law, they still manage to liberate petabytes of data every single year. They have applied super advanced techniques to data analysis, and they've applied people power. They do a number of projects, or have done a number of projects, that are effectively community-driven journalism. They are, without a doubt, in my view, the example that we should all be striving for. This is an organization that I have nothing but respect, and they're regularly, we have these discussions as a jury, like, oh my God, here comes La Nacion's entry again. And I'm sure they're wondering if at some point, you know, they did win again this year, a Sigma, and they're probably wondering if at some point there will be like Sigma fatigue, like we just can't give them any more, like just stop for a year and let us catch up or something.
Oh, and let somebody else win for a while.
Yeah, I don't personally believe in that. I think the best work should get the award. I think we all agree on that. And La Nacion will continue to get the great award, you know, if they continue to do great work.
If I can just jump on that. So a big shout out to Momi Peralta Ramos and our team over there that do incredible work. And because I get to work in countries where access to data is sometimes super tough. I always use La Nacion as an example of the tenaciousness, does that work? Does that exist? Yeah. Of journalists. And I mean, to me, they are one of my first memories of journalism teams trying to harness some coding technology to scrape data on public websites, where I remember a story where the Argentinian government would publish documents because they were obliged to, but they would publish them at midnight and then would just unpublish them at 1 past midnight. And so La Nacion had built a scraper to go onto the website at midnight, grab the document and make a copy of it so that the Argentinian readers could access that. Yeah, so I mean, they really deserve this award.
I'm just going to say, you know, that every time they come up, we go, oh, them again, and they win again, which is great. I'm not going to disqualify them from winning because they are great.
All right, and this is also in a project. We are seeing these kinds of projects more and more. Some of you have seen this, I'm guessing. Yeah, it made the rounds. For those who haven't, I am going to play a bit of this. When we saw this, we weren't quite sure what to do with it, because it's definitely journalism of a sort. It's visualization of a sort. It's audioalization of a sort.
Sonification.
Yeah, sonification. That's a much better word. See, I wish I spoke English. That's good. And it's also like art, you know. And we have seen a number of these pieces. One that Gina frequently talks about is the piece from the Wall Street Journal from a few years ago, done by one of my former folks, Eric Hinton, where he sort of data analyzed Hamilton.
And you know, again, you know, it just points to the fact that there's data everywhere, and that not every story has to be the most earth-shattering, life-threatening, you know, heavy, serious
this is
thing.
pretty heavy
Well,
stuff.
it is, fair enough. That one was not in some ways, but it was still just fantastic work. And
We're going
this,
to play a minute of this. So beat there is a day, and every note conforms to a death. The deaths start pretty soon, don't worry. That was pretty dark, sorry. Okay, so you get the idea. I mean, it's a really beautiful, beautiful piece, and I think the lesson here is that we are a copycat industry. This was a Swiss journalist, and he did this as a passion project. This wasn't part of his day job. But in my view, like, I ask, why not? I mean, why does everything have to look the same? Right? Why do we have to constantly do stories the same way? Why couldn't this been part of his day job? And I'm curious. I've never met him. I'd love to sometime. But we thought it was a brilliant, beautiful project, and we'd like to see more of this kind of work when appropriate. When appropriate. Yeah.
Yeah, and because we wanted to end the session on a more lighter note, and we just spoke about this, the fact that data journalism doesn't always have to be about super heavy corruption hunting subjects. Thankfully, journalists are also having fun doing things on much lighter topics. And when we discussed this, this example came to mind from the pudding in the US. Maybe you guys know of this organization. They frequently publish some pretty strong data-driven projects on much lighter subjects, but that are still very interesting. And God bless them, they spend hours and hours working on some very nitty-gritty data sets. And this example that you see on screen is about men singing with high-pitched voices in pop music, and they've just analyzed years and years of data on the topic to try and see if the success of music does rely on about you. Is it too late to tell you that everything means nothing if I can't have you, and I can't write one. They actually did build a data set out of all of this, right? So they just dissected pop music and analyzed the data behind it, and built some somewhat sexy charts on them, and then went into the data. And I mean, you can see that, yeah, you need to like music to be working on this project. Like, we'll share the link with you later.
And who doesn't say this doesn't add to the store of human knowledge, which it does. The story I remember for the pudding is the one where they analyzed